Have you noticed the weapons from World War I and II? Have you seen how many of these have magazines in very strange positions, extremely discordant from modern weapons, which almost always we see that their feeding is done from the bottom of the weapon, being the most ergonomic and practical way we have found so far. However, for the efficient bottom feeding to become the definitive way to load your weapon, decades of trial and error had to pass in the First and Second World War, where armament engineers invented really peculiar weapons with quite innovative features for the time to give them even a small advantage over their enemies. However, many times these weapons brought more problems than solutions. If we look at the armament development of the time, engineers were primarily looking to increase the firepower of soldiers. In the interwar period and when the Second World War began, infantry weapons were bolt-action rifles fed from the top by clips in a fixed internal magazine. This feeding system greatly limited the ability to carry ammunition in the weapon, increasing the frequency of reloads in combat. Then came the semi-automatic rifles like the M1 Garand, the SVT-40, or the GV-41 and 43. This greatly enhanced the soldiers' firepower. But these weapons had something in common. They had a deficient feeding system to a greater or lesser extent. So the solution to increase the firepower of the soldiers was to optimize the feeding systems of the weapons so that they could carry as much ammunition as possible. However, as you may know, increasing magazine capacity, weapons often had practical problems during World War I and World War II due to this reason. Magazine positioning varies greatly, including top, bottom, side, or diagonal feeding. Each feeding model has its own advantages and disadvantages. The most common position to place the feeding slot has always been from the bottom. Most of the most important weapons of the conflict were fed this way, like the German MP40 or the American Browning Barrett and Thompson, and on the Soviet side, the PPSH-41. If what you want is ergonomics, this is definitely the best way to do things. Standing or chest ground, the user could reload while keeping the sight. The reload was always faster and simpler this way, since when releasing the magazine, these fell by gravity. Also, if we look at the centers of gravity, the weapons with low magazines were much better balanced, so when firing, these feel more comfortable and with more aim. However, as a disadvantage, the systems, loaded from below, have to be constantly fighting against gravity, which increases its risk of failure and jamming. Besides, the biggest problem with these is when you want to shoot. Prone, the guns with large magazines and down tend to be taller. Therefore, when being prone, a common problem was that the magazine constantly hit the ground. Also, users with magazines down may feel encouraged to grab the gun by the magazine during shooting. Probably if they are soldiers, they will remember that when they grabbed the gun by the magazine during shooting, the sergeants, they would scold them these two things. Both the constant collision with the ground or grabbing the magazine during shooting caused the magazines to deform and caused more jams. In addition, when the magazines are too long, like the case of the German MP40, the user tends to rise a little more in a prone position because otherwise he could not aim with the sight of the weapon, being in the process, of course, much more exposed to enemy fire. There are weapons like the American Browning automatic rifle that solve this problem basically just by shortening the magazine, obviously sacrificing magazine capacity. So basically, bottom-fed systems have advantages but also many disadvantages. However, they are the current standard because precisely in this conflict it was determined that it was the best way to do things. However, there were many weapons that tried to solve all these problems, resulting in many solutions such as curving the magazines to make them smaller, but this was only a partial solution. More aggressive solutions were to do the exact opposite of feeding weapons from the bottom, that is, feeding them from the top. There were many weapons that did this, like the famous British Bren light machine gun, or the Super Owen machine gun, the Japanese Type 96, or also the Soviet DP-27. One of the great advantages of having the magazine from the top, they manifest when you are chest to ground in this position. With the magazine up, you can move the weapon freely without exposing yourself too much to enemy fire since the magazine from the top does not bother or hit the ground, also changing the magazine while being chest to ground. is extremely simpler and faster than with weapons with the magazine down. Also, the feeding system is more efficient and less prone to fail, since gravity helps it to work correctly, also with the magazine up. The soldier won't touch the magazine when firing, nor will it be colliding with anything, so it is less prone to damage from blows. But of course, soldiers who use machine guns like the British Brim also had problems with these. In these weapons, the magazine protruded quite a bit, greatly compromising its concealment, lying chest to ground. Also, the advantage of reloading quickly only applied when lying chest to ground, while everything happened when kneeling or standing. The opposite. Being more difficult to reload than other weapons, having to inevitably move the weapon a lot, and of course losing the sight in the process. And of course the fact of having a huge steel box. Obstructing your vision whenever you want to aim was a quite considerable problem. Because of all these problems, weapons like the Brim machine gun disappeared after the conflict. There were also other quite peculiar ways to put your magazine in the weapon, like the sideway, that were only used in submachine guns, and in some machine guns of the Second World War, submachine guns like the German 1000 P18 and 28, or the iconic British Sten, or also the Johnson 1000 1914 machine gun, or finally the late German FG 42. The main advantage comes when being chest ground. The side magazine does not obstruct the vision, does not collide with the ground, and allows you to move the weapon freely and be able to shoot at any angle. In this way, most machine guns are fed, and in the Second World War, with the help of a magazine, you could have a machine gun firing almost uninterruptedly for long periods of time. In addition, weapons with side magazines can be much longer without having too many consequences, unlike weapons with top and bottom magazines. But this paradigm, of course, had many disadvantages as well. The most important one was that they were clearly very cumbersome weapons. Having the side magazine turned out to be very unergonomic. These weapons were very useful in open field, but in urban combat they collided with everything, making it difficult for the soldier to lean against a wall for cover or pass through narrow places. Also, if we look at the center of gravity of a weapon with a side magazine, we will see that it is very uncomfortable, constantly shifting to the sides, making the soldier have to constantly correct the center of gravity, which caused more wear on the soldier. Today, side feeding is practically the standard for machine guns. Machine guns like the FN Minimi are side-fed using belts or NATO Standardization Agreement magazines. However, almost no light weapon is fed in this way. On the contrary, more eccentric weapons are fed from the top, through magazines that extend throughout the weapon. This makes them have no visibility problems and have a quite remarkable magazine capacity, as is the case with the Calico M100 or the Belgian submachine gun P90, using the concept of having a top magazine without the previously mentioned disadvantages. However, the constant advancement in weaponry focused on more ergonomic and balanced weapons made the concept of weapons with side or top magazines almost completely disappear. Now you will have an idea of why top and side magazines basically disappeared, even though bottom magazines have disadvantages. The disadvantages are overshadowed by the advantages they have, and of course, bottom magazines adapt much better to the needs of modern battlefields.